A fool is a poor judge of character, particularly their own. Tonight's video address is applicable to a large number of interpersonal relationships that Black people have. Of course, there is the ongoing issue regarding Black immigrants and their treatment of FBA DAS people. This is going to touch on that, but it deals with much more. At the risk of sounding overly dramatic or pretentious, it applies to most levels of interpersonal relationships that Black people have. Now, before we begin, do not do any blanket condemnations of Black immigrants in general, if you please. We have many here who know where it's at and what the deal is, and keep in mind there's a number of Black immigrants in this space who are every bit as put out with the behavior of those who have chosen to bootlick as we are. So before you post, just keep that in mind. Now, right off top, nobody has the right to treat you with disrespect. People who take you for granted, who mock you, ridicule you, or make it a point to degrade you, these are not people who deserve your time. Of all the things that you should require of other people, respect must be at the top of that list. Without that, it's impossible for you to have any sort of dealings. Not for the long term, you can't. And you certainly can't have dealings that you can trust. There's an old saying among marriage counselors: a marriage can survive the death of a child, but it can't survive the cap being always left off the toothpaste, a wife who's always nagging, or a husband who always leaves a toilet seat up. In other words, it can't survive disrespect. Well, what's true for the individual is also true for the group. Don't let that one fly over your head. As an example, I've been catching a little bit of flack for some of the comments that I made regarding Kristen Clark. You'll recall she's the Jamaican immigrant who went to court last Monday and lied, saying Ahmaud Arbery's family had approved of a plea deal with his killers, when in truth the family opposed any sort of plea deal. And then, even after admitting to this, Kristen Clark still told the judge to approve of the fraudulent plea deal anyway because she felt that it was the best way to heal. A blatant slap in the face to Ahmaud Arbery's family. Now, some of the immigrants, foreign flags, got in their feelings about that. The white media, by the way, they were the ones who identified Kristen Clark as a Jamaican immigrant. But I noticed none of the people who called themselves heaping scorn at me and throwing insults at me, they didn't seem to mind the white media pointing that out at all. So if the white media points out someone's Jamaican heritage, that's fine. But if somebody else, especially somebody whose ancestry goes back to slavery in this country, does it, then all of a sudden it becomes wrong? I wonder why one would be considered threatening when you got the white media, who was the mouthpiece of white supremacy. They do it, and that's not threatening for some reason. The Black immigrants who are on code, they don't have a problem with it at all. But the ones who only want to have one toe in the pristine waters of Black empowerment, but who already know that they can't swim, they're all butthurt over it. Well, I've got something to say about that. In fact, what I'm saying is not merely about the Kristen Clarks or the Candace Owens, but just for people in general. It's about respect. Respect is the bedrock of any relationship. And disrespect is a cancer that will eat away at any relationship, no matter how good it might seem. Disrespect destroys. It kills. Disrespect makes it difficult for people to stand your presence. It makes it impossible for them to want to be around you. Take note of the things you say and the things you do. Perhaps you've done some little slick mess from time to time, and the person you've done it against didn't make it into a knockdown, drag-out fight on the spot, but they've told you about it. And if these acts of disrespect go on long enough, they'll make sure you get a receipt. I've met a lot of people in my time, and when I see someone who's self-destructive, well, as Mr. Harvey, aka Your World, says, I give them a wide berth. We have a lot of chronic insecurity in the Black community. It's just absolutely rampant. And I'm not just talking about idiots like the fraud or the A-dunce crowd. It goes deeper than that. It's broader than that. It's everywhere. Places where it shouldn't even be. When I see someone who makes it a point to run their mouths about all their business, that's someone who can't keep a secret. And as a people who are under siege, we can't allow any blabbermouths. One of the core principles of my philosophy regarding resources is that nobody's supposed to know what you're holding. Sam Walton was one of the richest men who ever lived. But you wouldn't have known it by looking at what he chose to drive to work. You see, true power doesn't advertise. Some years ago, I read an interview with a novelist, And the novelist said that he was having a conversation with a friend, and he asked the friend, "Do you believe that there are people who can walk on water?" And his friend said, "Yes." And then he asked his friend, "Well, do you believe that there are people who can fly?" And his friend said, "Absolutely." And the author said that he asked his friend, "Well, why don't they show us?" And his friend replied, "Why would someone so advanced that they can defy the very laws of nature and physics itself care to show you that he can fly?" And he's absolutely right. Do you see human beings taking out the time to try to teach the Cocker Spaniel, "Here's how we build airplanes. Here's how we do this stuff"? It wouldn't make any sense. Power of a necessity requires discipline. And somebody who suffers from diarrhea of the mouth has the very opposite of discipline. Now, immigrants tend to be very humble when they get off those boats, and the government puts them in black neighborhoods. They don't brag about anything. Not at that time, they don't. When they first arrive, why, it's humble pie all day. But the second that those government programs that we fought for and those social initiatives that we fought to establish, and in many cases actually bear the names of our lawmakers, soon as those immigrants get a chance to tap into that, they'll be the first ones to start lecturing us about how much better they're doing. And before any of the immigrants decide to give the typical denials, keep in mind, you know as well as I do, you also see this at the individual level too. But why is it that you have some of these immigrants who, first time that they get two nickels to rub together, all of a sudden they want to go to the very people who they were among when they had nothing, and those are the people who they want to call themselves rubbing it in the faces of? What are they trying to prove? And to whom? People who are prone to disrespect, they're that way due to an inherent insecurity. And the reason that they always seem to be coming to you to try to let you know about it is because they see something in you that makes them insecure, something that they've always seen. What they're telling you is, "I've always felt insecure in your presence." Greatness doesn't have to brag or boast. Greatness simply is, and lets everyone else sing its praises. The person or group who puffs out their chest about how great they are, they're looking for validation, and it's the people that they're running up in the faces of who they want the validation from. And it makes these people's insecurities exponentially worse when the people who they want the validation from really don't make it a point to reach out to them at all. And these insecure people notice that. They understand, even at a level that they're not willing to admit, they understand they're trying to get you to say, "Oh, you're doing just so well." Meanwhile, you could care less what they know about you at all, and it becomes obvious to them after a while you would prefer to keep it that way. What makes this particularly galling is that the people trying to run us into the ground wouldn't have what little they've got if it were not for us. They wouldn't have the opportunities that we provided, nor a wealthy country to immigrate to, because it would never have been built until they arrived. And when they come to our neighborhoods, we help them out. So-and-so who needs food, some aspiring DJ who needs a mixed board, we give people the hookup. We provide them with a place to stay. We bootstrap their first business ventures from our own pockets. We get them going. They eat off of what we made possible. Oh, but then they have the nerve to turn around and tell us they did it all by themselves, that we did nothing, and why, whatever you Negroes in the hood have, that was actually because of our immigrant group. Our immigrant group made opportunities for you. Whenever you have some liar who comes to you claiming that your opportunities were the result of what they did, you're supposed to be demanding the receipts. What you'll find very quickly is they don't have any. But that's the first thing that disrespect requires. It requires that, first of all, you start off from a false premise. You have to. They're walking on the path we made and the bricks that we laid. We gave them their come up. And how do they respond? They disrespect us. They claim credit for things they didn't do. They suddenly catch a case of selective amnesia, and they boast about whatever consumer product they bought with the money we made possible, and they constantly run to us, insulting us and mocking our people. Why do they do that? Why would anyone do that? Because they recognize we have self-confidence and they have codependency. That's why they're always looking for someone to be impressed with them. They want someone to validate them. But notice how they don't make it a point to run into the face of white society doing that. Because none of their twos and fews and the couple of nickels in their pocket would impress the dominant society. They only try to brag about that with us. But if they can't resist the urge to disrespect us, then why is it that they want to make sure that they're in our face telling us whatever it is they claim that they're doing that's so big? Because they saw things in us that made them to feel insecure. So they're screaming and yelling at us to look at what they've got, look at what they did. Oh, look who we got in this political office, or who it is we got on this TV show. They want us to reassure them, as if they can somehow receive our self-confidence through osmosis. Now, if you got a collective or an individual who chooses to behave that way, they can't tell people not to trash them or mock them when they inevitably lose it. Because insecurity and failure go hand in hand. They're flip sides of the same coin. People are cyclical, both as individuals and as a group. Let's look at the individuals and how your routine says a lot about you. This might sound a little bit out there, but follow me here. Big data. That's how Google and Facebook, Meta, make their money. They take the information from all of your clicks and keystrokes and all of your cell phone information that they use their apps to track you with. They take all of that information and they sell it to corporations. And looking at how these companies are the richest corporations on the planet, that gives you some idea of just how valuable your information is. This allows these corporations to make what they call a behavioral profile. Now, a behavioral profile doesn't care about your name or your race, though I should add that the white men who own these companies do. Anyway, the point is, if you were to look at your life, for instance, your buying habits, when you go to work, when you get gas, how much gas you buy, when you watch television, what shows, when you exercise, even informal things like when you pay your bills or when you get medical care, you would find pretty quickly that it would look like a cardiogram. It would be a rhythm of peaks and valleys happening at the exact same time, every day, week, month, year, etc. You would see that there's a consistency to it. You could practically set your watch to it. Someone could watch your life's routine and they could predict almost exactly when you'll go to work, when you'll have breakfast, what you'll buy, and how often. That's what a behavioral profile is. And it's very powerful for the person who has that information, because most people are unaware of these things. They give no thought to it. Now, if something were to happen where there was some sort of change in that pattern, something to disrupt that rhythm, then that could have profound significance. If somebody's got a pattern of self-destructive behavior, then it doesn't matter how high they climb in politics, nor how much money they have, or how accepted they think they are by the dominant society. That person is inherently unstable. They'll seem to do well, then fall flat on their behinds, because that's that person's cycle. Boom and bust. Most people, of course, who are like this prefer to think of themselves as exactly the opposite. They choose to perceive themselves as having a pattern of getting knocked down, through no fault of their own, of course, and then picking themselves back up again with no one's help other than their own, by the way. Instead of seeing the boom and bust cycle that actually exists, they prefer to see bust and boom. No matter how many times the cycle happens, they never seem to realize the order that it's going in. Now, what's this have to do with behavioral profiles? Well, as I've been saying and will continue to say, what's true for the individual is also true for the group. Take a look at a group's history, and you'll see certain cycles. There's a reason the countries in the Caribbean have been politically fractured and socially chaotic for so long. Yes, the white supremacists have stolen their resources and have tampered hideously with their internal politics, but there's a flip side to that equation. That's only part of the problem. Otherwise, when these immigrants get to the U.S., they would be the last ones to trust the dominant society. Instead, as we've seen, they're doing the most to run into the arms of the same white supremacists who they say wrecked their countries in the first place. You cannot scapegoat white power for wrecking your country in the Caribbean, and then when you get here, immediately run into the arms of those same white supremacists. You can't do that and then claim, well, that's the problem. Brother Tariq has been on Twitter, and he's been promoting a conversation about the rift between black immigrants and FBAs, and when he asks why these countries are in the shape they're in, the answer is always the same: because of our government. That's the go-to response heard across the board. It's as predictable as night follows day. But when one looks at the society, we see patterns of internal strife and backstabbing. Not just once, but we see it repeatedly. Haiti has street wars going on right now between various gangs of bandits, and you see the same thing in Jamaica. It's not as violent as what's going on in Haiti, but it's still there. That's not the International Monetary Fund's fault. When Haiti overthrew the French, they immediately began paying the French reparations. When the U.S. came and took over the island of Navassa, Haiti's government didn't do anything about it. So already from Haiti's very origins, we've already been able to see a pattern of internal capitulation and external passivity. And to be fair, they're not alone. We in the U.S., we have cycles in our history as well. For instance, our ancestors here in the United States staged many slave rebellions over the centuries, but most of them were betrayed from within. In the 20th century, from the Bureau of Investigation's House Negroes who took down Marcus Garvey, to various bootlicks who came against Dr. King, to the FBI and even CIA infiltrators who wormed their way into the Black Power organizations, we've always had a problem with letting the people who will betray us sit down at the table with us, breaking bread with them, and no matter how many times they stab us in the back, we keep giving them another chance to do it. That's our pattern. And it's foolish to deny it because it's manifestly obvious to everyone. Everybody's been taking advantage of it because they can openly see it. Some of us think that if we deny it, that it's not there. Our fatal flaw has been that we've been too willing to open our arms to everyone, even when they're carrying a knife. That's a bad habit we've got, a bad cycle. And for those of you who are taking umbrage with the current conversation going on now, all that's happening is we're in the process of breaking a bad habit. We're in the process of breaking a cycle. We have to go from repeating this vicious cycle to enacting a virtuous cycle. We, as DAS-FBA, have absorbed a tremendous amount of abuse and harm from other groups, and yes, that includes black immigrants. As your world likes to say, not all, but enough. Few things say as much about a group or an individual as how you let other people treat you. When people have been told their behavior is disrespectful and they just keep on doing it anyway, the solution isn't to keep telling them that they're being disrespectful. They heard you the first time, and the 5th time, and the 12th time. When someone has a track record of habitually disrespecting another person, when that other person flips the script, they're not in the wrong. You are. People are human beings. Shocking, I know. We have thoughts, we also have feelings too, and we act on both. We also have memories, as individuals and as a group. I keep repeating that phrase over and over again so the people who wonder why we're taking such a hard line on this understand and accept that it wasn't just one thing that brought us to this point. No matter what some people may try to tell themselves, we didn't get to this point overnight. It wasn't the result of one particular event or one particular person or one particular string of circumstances. This was always here. It's been here for a while now. Now, what didn't exist until this point was a critical mass of black people who were finally fed up enough with the status quo that they would decide to speak their minds as a group. That is different. Having a platform that makes it where we can aggregate all of those voices in one place. That's what's changed. The 20th century was the 100-year experiment in Pan-Africanism, but the problem is we discovered that it takes two to tango. And while we in the U.S. were willing to unite with all Africans, it became very quickly clear that the rest of the African world wasn't looking to unite with us. In fact, a lot of them were simply looking for a way to make themselves feel superior to us, whether there was any basis for it or not. We're talking about black empowerment, and they're talking about, look at me. We'd spent 100 years saying that all black people are brothers. If there was anything white supremacy taught us here, it didn't care what tribe you came from. It only cared about the color of your skin. And we tried preaching that evangel to as many black people as possible. And what we found was that the majority of black folks around the world weren't trying to hear that. We kept repeating slogans and mantras like the same slave ship that dropped you off in the Caribbean dropped us off in the Americas. And while these observations were undeniably true, it was also undeniably true that we were the only ones who were serious about that. Well, the 100-year experiment is over now, and we're able to put away our lab equipment, take off the lab coat, and render a final report. Experiment abandoned. A test tube can only blow up in your face so many times before you decide to quit. The problem is that there's no real enforcement mechanism when it comes to respect. It's a mutual agreement between two ostensibly honorable parties. Take the Italian mafia as a case study. They were smart enough to realize that fighting each other in the streets was a losing proposition, so they established the commission. The five families started putting their heads together. Without a commission, there was nothing to stop each and every conflict from turning into a war in the streets. And that's fine if the only thing that you want to do is be shooting at people. But if you're trying to build a business and trying to build a life, then perhaps you want to find other ways to deal with the occasional difference of opinion. What the commission established was a framework around which these guys who had formerly been trying to kill each other could finally sit down, and when it came time to talk, they could talk, as opposed to get out the guns and kill each other. They started making a lot more money, and law enforcement found itself basically having to bow to the mob. Now, what needs to be remembered is that the only thing that held the commission together was respect. If the men who ran the commission behaved and operated like the street thugs they governed, then they wouldn't have lasted very long. You didn't hear about members of the commission coming in and saying, "Hey, Vito, take a look at what I got over here. Look what I'm doing." They didn't do that mess. You watch shows like The Sopranos, busting chops, especially for the most ignorant members of the group. That was their daily pastime. That seemed to be the main thing that they did. And that's fine when you got a street soldier or an associate, because he ain't running anything. But if you're a boss, you don't make it a point to be doing that kind of thing. And you certainly don't try it with other bosses. You see, the kind of insults and digs and denigrations and dirtbag behavior and habitual disrespect that's rampant in the black community, the men who ran the commission didn't operate that way at all. They weren't children, and they weren't low-level street dudes either. There was no need to kill any of the commission members who showed disrespect, because if you showed disrespect, if you had a reputation like that, you wouldn't have been on the commission in the first place. Respect is the central pillar. Without it, there's no point in even trying to build anything. Well, the problem is we don't have a commission. That means that there is no organized group to enforce any sort of rules. So, if you have someone who just insists on being disrespectful, conflict becomes inevitable. Without respect, this is all you're left with, because there's nowhere else to go. Now, you can try not fighting, but when someone is being disrespectful habitually, there's only so much turning the other cheek or laughing it off or attempting to wait to see if this person grows up that you're going to do before you finally decide something has to be done. We've learned a painful lesson, and I suppose it was just something we had to go through, but people are cyclical in nature. When you have someone who has become accustomed to disrespecting you, and they make it a point to try to downgrade you when you've said and done nothing to them, or if this person makes it a point that they want to run in your face either to insult you or to pat themselves on the back, at what point do you say, "I'm not going to be part of that"? And you do have a say in it. That's what we're telling our family here at home. Now, you can't stop stupid people from being stupid. You can't fix stupid. But you can make it clear that you won't suffer fools gladly, and you won't allow yourself or your group to be abused. Now, what happens when you finally make it indisputably and arguably clear that enough is enough? What happens when the other party who's been accustomed to disrespect understands you're putting a stop to it? Well, take a look at the responses that we've seen over the last month or so. They'll play the victim. They're shocked. They'll claim that all they ever did was to help you. The lies will come hard and heavy, and disrespectful people are always trying to take credit for things they had absolutely nothing to do with. So many white supremacists say that their ancestors built the U.S., when most of them didn't even get to the U.S. until the 1880s. Over 100 years after the country was founded, and nearly 400 years after the first Europeans showed up, and their first settlements ended with them dying. The country that most of the white population's ancestors came to was a country that was pre-built. It already existed. It already had teeming cities and industries and a prosperous government, all of which built by our black labor. So for someone to come along and try to take credit for something they didn't do, it's typical of disrespectful people. Their insecurity is showing. Same way that whenever you look at the genres of music that black people made, practically all American music comes from black people. And yet it doesn't matter if it's jazz, rock and roll, R&B, hip hop, or what else. You always got somebody trying to say, oh no, that didn't come from you. Our people did this. Then how come your folks weren't doing it at home? You know, we can track these things. We can actually find the origins of these things because they occurred recently enough where we can track it to the day. Why, to hear these other groups tell it, everyone created rap music. Well, except for the foundational Black American / DAS community. Apparently, we didn't create it at all. So Jamaican immigrants created it, Haitian immigrants created it, white people from Europe created it, Jewish music executives created it, even Asians created it. Why, everybody had a hand in creating it. Everybody was responsible for the creation of rap music, except for black people. Those of us who came out of slavery in this country, apparently the ones who were most responsible for bringing it to the world, the ones who actually were playing it in the streets and house parties before anybody even knew it existed, we didn't have anything to do with it. Everybody else did except for us. Right? Now, if these people were actually so instrumental and key to creating these things that we clearly had no hand in, anytime you got some scumbag who tries to tell you that they did this and you didn't do something and why, whatever you think you have was the result of what they did, then tell the bastard to destroy it. Tell him why you should be able to easily destroy it then. You got somebody trying to say that our people didn't make this or that, then by all means, go ahead and destroy it. It'll be easy for you to because you were the one who made it. Except they can't. We, however, can easily destroy it simply by walking away because without us, we take away the pulse. We're the ones who breathe life into these things. Without us, they would wither and die. What people call American culture is actually black people's culture, specifically those of us who came out of slavery in this country. And you got some people who are trying to imitate Europe. That's so-called American culture. Without us, I don't know, maybe they'd be running around doing like the beatniks did back in the day, trying to find out if there was something from Asia for them to imitate. But when you go to Asia, you see them trying to imitate us as well. So without us to make sure that the music forms that we came up with, not to mention that the lingo and slang that we created to make sure that it maintains the heartbeat, without us being there, it would shrivel up and die. Because these other groups, they didn't create it, hence they don't know what comes next. That's always a big problem that all of these suburban white kids have had whenever you have some white company that calls themselves trying to make them into the next big thing. You can give them a platform, but you can't give them legitimacy. Miley Cyrus can run around calling herself twerking, but that freaking looked like she was having a full body spasm. I don't know what the hell to call that mess. It's like somebody who's only heard a song one time, but then they're going to call themselves repeating it. They don't know the lines. They only know one verse, usually part of the chorus, but they don't know what comes next. You didn't breathe life into something that means you don't have the power to take it away. The only thing that you can do at best is repeat it very poorly. But you don't have the ability to kill it. And if you do, then by all means do so. All these other groups who are telling us about what it is that they built, that black people are just imitating what they did or eating off of them or what have you. Anytime somebody does that, tell them in that case, then go ahead and kill it then. Go ahead and put it out of its misery. Because you got all these black people who are calling themselves glomming onto it. Go ahead and kill it then. And make sure you stay away from us when you do, because that way we won't be there to call ourselves leeching on to whatever it is that you make next. So go ahead and do it. Go ahead, pull the plug. Nobody's stopping you. Disrespectful people are an insecure people. They always need you, not the other way around. The reason they try to brag to you is because they want you to think that they're a success. They need you to validate them. You have something they don't and will never have, something that makes them feel insecure with themselves. Because it's not as if you've been running around asking them to validate you. We never made it a point to tell the Africans the plain, simple history that we are the most oppressed people on earth, and yet we did more to liberate and empower ourselves and every other group of people on the planet than they did for themselves in most cases. Whenever non-black people talk about blacks, we're the ones they're talking about, not Afro-Britons, not Jamaicans, not Haitians, nor even Africans in almost all cases. They're talking about a small handful of folks right here in the U.S. Whenever non-black people say black, we're the ones they're talking about. And yet we never lorded this over any of them. In fact, we did the opposite. We dismissed and denied any distinctions between ourselves and them. Whatever we accomplished, we held it up as being an accomplishment for all black people all over the world. But the black immigrants and those outside the U.S., they did the opposite. Most of this is garden variety envy and jealousy. They feel as if they're living in our shadow, but we didn't put any shadow there. We told them repeatedly that we're all on the same team. So the question is, why wasn't that good enough for them? It would have been one thing if they had merely said, well, we're trying to establish our own particular identity in our own right. That would have been one thing. But that's not what happened. They went way beyond distinction or distinguishing here. They decided that they were going to make abusing us a full-time job. We kept trying to wave that Pan-African flag, but as you can see, people's arms have gotten tired. We could only bang our heads against that particular wall for so long before we finally decided to stop. So yeah, there's a rift now, and how is it going to heal? I'm not sure, because we weren't the ones who caused it, and we're not the ones who perpetuated it. When will it heal? When we're able to look back and see that there's been far more years of respect than disrespect. Time can heal this wound, but without honesty and a change of behavior, nothing will be healed. Because there's something between us that previously didn't exist before. Doubt. It's one thing to not like someone, it's another thing entirely to not trust them. So that's what's gone wrong here. And no, I'm not going to promote the falsehood that both sides are equally to blame. Do we bear some culpability for being habitually naive? Sure. But we bear no blame, because blame is for those who are malicious or careless, and we were neither. We haven't suddenly changed. We didn't get up one morning and decide to cut anyone off. This discourse that's going on has been going on all along. More and more of us are saying it, which is making it harder to escape having to deal with, and that seems to be what's got people shook. This is an internal dispute that's been going on for a few generations now, and we all know it. That's part of the reason why we can all make references to it going back several decades. The only thing that's changed is that it's out in the open, with enough of us saying it consistently so that it cannot be ignored. This has been here all along, and it's way past time that we had an honest discussion as to why that is. Now, there's been a lot of anger that's been coming from black immigrant groups whenever this discussion comes up. And as I've always taught you, when somebody shows an expression of anger, anger and fear are often, not always, but they are often flip sides of the same coin. So what is it that the black immigrants seem to be concerned about? What's got them worried? What's made them fearful, for want of a better term? It certainly can't be physical harm, because we have never harmed them, nor have we expressed any desire to. We're talking about drawing a distinction between ourselves. Nobody said anything about destroying anyone else, or even a division for that matter, merely a distinction. And that seems to be what's got people worried. Why is that? The concern seems to be that if the majority of black people in the U.S. distinguish themselves from black migrants, then the dominant society won't be giving the migrants opportunities. And they simply do not have the numbers or the resources to have a substantive counter to that. They need the majority of black people if they're going to be pushing back against that. But is that a problem for us? Nobody told anyone to hitch their wagon to the dominant society's star. It's time for some people to start doing some introspection, examining their own behavior. When you have dealings with other people, what kind of dealings are they? What's the tone and tenor of them? Whenever they see you, is it because you're calling to see how they're doing? Do you express genuine concern with their condition? Or is it because you're bored, or you feel like unburdening yourself, or because you want to brag about something? When you're in this person's presence, do you act with respect? Or do you go out of your way to show how much disdain and disrespect you can display? When you've been told you're out of line, do you dig in your heels? Do you become belligerent? Or do you get humble and find out what's going on and then change your behavior? Now, of course, you can't change someone else's behavior. You can only change your own. If you tell someone their behavior is a problem and they still keep at it, then you're left with no other option than to put them on notice, forcefully. Some people have hard heads. It would be best if they listened, but not everyone wants to do that. When someone's finally had enough, they're not going to send you a neatly typed double-spaced letter. They'll simply stop fooling with you. You'll be calling them, but you'll notice that they never call you, or at least it's going to be very, very rare that they initiate any contact with you. That's the way it's going to be. Or, and follow me here, or what if black folks decide that we don't let it get that far? How about you start showing some respect? It's easier than you think. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Larry Beard, Federica Moore, Alfredo Roberts, Wade Blanks, and Mandisa. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.